The time is at hand.
The elusive dog-like creature attacks livestock, bleeding them dry of blood.
8 to 10 feet tall, shadowy aliens.
But I am telling you right now,
we need a great reset.
And this is extremely dangerous to our democracy.
Babylon the Great is fallen, is fallen.
Welcome to In Dark Places. I'm your Huckleberry, Junebug Fugit. I'll be joined shortly by Jimmy Petnito, Mr. Haunted. He's out in the yard right now setting up his new werewolf display. I work at a grocery store. And business is kind of bad. And they try to have these weekend sales to try to boost their profits and stuff. So they have a sale every Friday and Saturday. And it's basically the only time we do any business. Everybody just rushes in on Friday and Saturday. The whole county comes in, tripping over each other, pushing each other out of the way. Think Black Friday, but it's every week, especially on Fridays. Fridays are the worst. But it never fails. Every Saturday, as we're closing up and out of everything, because it's only a 2-day sale, there's always a bunch of people that come in Saturday night at 8 o'clock and they're looking for the stuff that's on sale. And then they yell at me because we don't have it. Well, buddy, maybe you should have came in sooner. Thanks for letting me vent there. Reports of jellyfish-like UFOs. Bizarre cases of jellyfish UFOs have come to light. Analyst Bob Spearing of MUFON recently spilled the beans to In Dark Places about these mysterious aerial objects. MUFON has studied drawings and photographs dating back to the 70s with giant cloud-like mushrooms floating in the sky of Denmark. And there have also been more recent sightings in places such as Vancouver. Fascinatingly, Spearing shared details of encounters with indoor alien jellyfish, like a case in Singapore, where a woman was said to have been attacked by a squid-like object with bioluminescent tentacles. The creature, whatever it was, had attached itself to the back of the woman, and she felt pain, and that's what woke her up, he said. Spearing was recently in the news for revealing debris from a possibly downed alien craft. This week on the show, we have Spooky Ghost Stories. The story was sent in by Beverly. Thanks, Beverly. The story is called Transparent Levitating Ball. Sometime around 1990, on a mild, somewhat overcast day, I was just about ready to leave the house to run errands around 11 a.m. The house was in a typical suburban neighborhood of Santa Rosa, California. Suddenly, from inside the house, I heard my car horn going on and off intermittently. This was strange because our car was an old 1978 Dodge and it did not have a car alarm system. This was somewhat annoying as it was parked across the street on a curb in this very quiet neighborhood. I grabbed my keys and I went to see what was going on, but as soon as I opened the front door, the horn stopped. So I finished getting ready and headed out to my car. As I stepped into the quiet street and made my way to the car, I saw a transparent floating ball about 30 yards away, levitating about 3 feet above the pavement, coming toward me in a straight, unwavering path. I had experienced some strange phenomena recently in the remote forest of Northern California, where I lived for some time, and just arrived in Santa Rosa a few days prior. I was not startled nor scared, but felt the urge to get into my vehicle before the ball reached me, and had me somewhat anxious. Calmly, I took my keys and unlocked the door, and quickly got in and shut the door. By now the ball was approaching the front of my car, moving about walking speed and traveling at about side view mirror height. It floated right by my driver's side window. I watched it continue to travel through my side view mirror. When it turned the corner in the road, I could see it now in my rear view mirror until it moved along and out of sight. The thing was about the size of a basketball and perfectly round. It was completely transparent, and I could see right through it. It almost seemed like it wanted to be invisible. It did not change shape or size, and it did not waver in its path along the street. It was very strange and a little unnerving. I do not believe it was paranormal. I got the impression that it was some sort of drone or a spy, that it was not intended to be noticed. Has anyone out there experienced this? I have not been able to find a similar account.
This fella says, I have seen shadow people. When I was a young child, I had 3 imaginary friends. They were shadows on the wall, distinct heads and shoulders for each, but blended into one being past that. I remember many times I'd be laying in my mom's bed and jabbering away at them about Lord only knows what, while my mom did dishes or made dinner in the kitchen. I'd see them out of the corner of my eye quite a few times over the years, after I stopped seeing the imaginary friends, which occurred when I started first grade. The last time I know I saw a shadow person for real, and not even out of the corner of my eye, but full on right in front of my face, was a few years ago. My boyfriend and I were staying at his parents' house. It was nighttime, and they were gone. Boyfriend was upstairs, and I was on the patio smoking a cigarette. They have a hot tub, and the steps for it were right in front of the glass doors leading to the kitchen. I was sitting on those stairs, and the kitchen light was on. It was very bright light, and I saw an incredibly tall figure walk from my left to the right into the kitchen. And it was definitely what you would think a shadow person would look like. Very black. Yet, when it went more into the kitchen, and where it should have thrown a shadow across the door from being in front of the kitchen light, there was none. And where it walked from was just a wall, shared by the garage and kitchen. There were no vehicles in the neighborhood passing by all the time either. Nothing at all to play tricks, any tricks of light. It left me quite a bit unsettled that night.
The story is called The Voice of Something Not Human. We used to visit my grandparents in L.A. for Christmas growing up. The top floor bedroom of their L.A. home still housed the beds of my great-grandpa and grandma. My parents would stay in these beds when we would stay for Christmas. The bed that was my great-grandfather's had the stain from the wax he would wear in his hair still on the fabric cushion of the headboard. In this bed, no one could sleep without the feeling like someone was standing over you, watching you. I was home alone, taking a shower in the upstairs bathroom, and smelled old-school pipe tobacco that was not there. My grandfather used to take a Polaroid picture of the table set for Christmas dinner, often while listening to Sinatra. One time, there was a large white mist floating above the table in the picture when it developed. I used to wake up early in the morning and eat various leftovers, while I would watch Saturday morning cartoons. One morning, shortly before Christmas, I tiptoed up the wooden stairs from my room on the main level to the house to ask my father if I could eat something out of the fridge. I remember it being very dark in my parents' room. I did not see my father in his bed as I peered through the banister. I just walked back down to the main level of the house and toward the kitchen past the front door. Just before the kitchen and to the right of the study was the door to the long white hallway that led down to the lower level of the house that contained the laundry room, downstairs apartment, and the door to the outdoor pool. I opened the door facing the long hallway down. I mustered up the courage in my 10-year-old self to squeak out in a high-pitched voice, asking, "Dad, are you down there?" I instantly knew that I was not alone. I felt an electric tingly chill and was filled with the sense that I should not have asked that question, and that I should escape as quickly as possible. What I heard gives me goosebumps to this day. I heard a terrible hissing and powerful voice, which I could hear with both my ears, but also felt as if it were reverberating throughout my mind and my very soul. The voice said, "No." Scared does not cover what I felt. Primal, consciousness-altering, sheer terror would be more accurate. Slamming the door, I ran to my room, and then I slammed that door. I dove underneath the false safety of my covers. I waited there for hours, wide awake, until my father entered the room, confused to why I was not already awake watching Transformers or G.I. Joe. I told him what had happened. He talked me into following him downstairs so that I could see that he could prove that no one was in any of the closet space or that could have possibly done such a thing. This pointless act was equally as terrifying, as I was in no doubt as to what happened. Of course, he did not find anything, so I was left confused and terrified with only questions. The feeling of dread and the certainty of that we were not actually alone in the house when we thought we were. Years later, when I was about 17, my father admitted that when he was down there playing as a kid, he would hear voices that he couldn't understand. And he would hear people walking up and down the stairs that weren't there. I know what you're thinking. Someone was waiting downstairs in a closet all night to scare me, or maybe a walkie-talkie. The house had an alarm, which made a loud audible beep throughout the house, so no one else got in and was attempting to hide downstairs. There was no baby monitors or other technology to use. A walkie-talkie would not have produced the perfectly echoing sound, and not the feeling of terror that I felt. Only someone who has experienced the electric chill of an experience with a ghost can understand the tangibility of the feeling. Lastly, and most importantly, even at that age, I know a human voice when I hear it, and this was not one. I heard the voice of something that was not human, maybe a demon or an angry ghost, but it still chills me till this day. This story is called Shadow Figure Demon. I've seen and heard unexplainable things for many years. Mostly it happens in the few nights surrounding the full moon. I don't know why. The subject of my post, though, begins a little over 2 years ago, when I was on my honeymoon. We were staying in a cabin, and one night, by the fireplace, just after being intimate, I began to see a black figure standing still watching us. I was scared, but I didn't mention it as we went to bed. It was there, next to the bed, as soon as I laid down, and I actually told my husband that I was seeing it and freaking out. He didn't see anything, so after the sun rose and I was in my right mind again, I chalked it up to being unstable somehow. After arriving home to the apartment we were newly living in, I started to see this shadow figure every night in the spare bedroom, in the darkness, through the slightly open door. I would try keeping the door closed, but somehow it was always open again, although that could have been just my husband's doing. I was afraid to say anything because I was convinced that saying it out loud would let the creature know that I was aware of it, and that would lead to an attack or something. I started seeing it in our room too, and when I saw it standing in the corner, even with the light on, while in an intimate moment with my husband, I had had enough, and I broke down and I told him. I had a bit of a meltdown that night, but he still couldn't see it, and tried comforting me. After that, I didn't see it again for a long time, and felt much better. I figured my not wanting to say anything about it was probably the wrong decision, and I probably could have saved myself a lot of fear. Well, I have seen it again lately, but only in the dark, and usually when I'm alone. I know that the eyes can play tricks in the dark, and I'm not discounting the possibility that what I see and hear might all be in my head, but tonight's events seemed different. For one thing, it's far from being the full moon, and what I saw was much clearer. I went into my bedroom to get my computer, but I could see my husband laying in his spot in the bed. We had been planning earlier to be intimate when we got a chance, but I was surprised that he had stopped gaming so early for it. I didn't mind, though, and was smiling and about ready to crawl into bed with him, when it suddenly struck me that I've never seen him laying in a bed at 9 o'clock before, without also looking at his phone. There was no phone light shining on his face, so I began to pull my phone out to shine my flashlight on him. I heard a slight rustling sound coming from his direction, just as I turned my flashlight on. Nothing was there, not even bedding in the shape of a person. Yes, it was dark, but there was a streetlight through the window. I could clearly see his head with it until my light turned on, and then suddenly I could hear him again downstairs, still playing his video game. But I couldn't hear him. The whole time I thought he was in bed. My immediate reaction was to laugh and calmly go downstairs to the real him. But as I've been sitting on the couch thinking about it, I'm kind of worried about what it all might mean. I wish I was making this up. I didn't make the mistake of keeping it to myself this time, but I think he thinks I'm joking. I did some research on incubi, although maybe I shouldn't have. Everything I found out about the old beliefs only says that it does its thing while the victim sleeps. Nothing like what I thought almost happened with me. But still, I'm afraid to go to sleep now, at least by myself. I'm afraid to do anything by myself. Does anyone know more about this type of experience? I'm at a loss about where to go from here.
Wow. What am I going to talk about here? Here's some Hatman stories. When I was 4 or 5 years old, one of my earliest memories actually, I woke up on the floor of my grandma's living room next to my sleeping mom. From where I was laying, I could see the front door, which had a window at its very top. The window was about 8 feet high. Like I said, at the top of the door, I could see a shadowy figure of a man in a fedora looking in at me. I pulled the covers over my head, scared out of my wits. I'm 43 now, and it's still one of my most vivid memories. Here's another story. I recall seeing him, Hatman, when I was about 14. I attended a summer program where middle schoolers would stay at a college campus and take AP classes for college credits. I was wide awake and laying on a loft bed, lights out, with my 2 roommates on their own loft beds. My roommate says, "WTF is that?" We look over, and right in front of the door was this huge, tall shadow dude with a fedora-style hat. Couldn't make out any features. We were so scared, but we couldn't leave because he was right in front of the door. I went under my covers. I felt him near me. I peeked out, and he was right at my bedside. I don't know if he was looking at me or not, due to not being able to distinguish features, but I flew back under the covers and did not come out. Next day, we all talked about it, and apparently he went to each of our beds and inspected, as they both saw him looking in my direction. Then the other roommates saw him do the same thing to each of them too. All right, this story actually has a name. This is a little Frankie Ortiz. Thanks, Frankie. So a little backstory on it before I tell my story. The Hat Man is an apparition that is common for people to see late at night during sleep paralysis or something that is standing in the corner of your room. He is a tall black figure with a coat and a fedora or hat that looks like one. You can't see his face, but you can see the coat and fedora. There's not a lot I could find online about him, but the guess is that he comes to protect children from trauma and helps them get through it. I don't know how true it is, but I'll get to my story. I was living with my mother and sister in a very small one-bedroom apartment in Albuquerque, New Mexico, and we barely had a bed to sleep on, so I would sleep on the floor. I was 5, and my parents had just split up. Being so little, I couldn't really understand what was happening, but my mom always made us happy and was loving. I remember one particular night when we were sleeping on the floor and me and my sister were asleep on the bed. I woke up on a hot summer night and popped my head up and asked my mom if she can get me a glass of water. She was closer to the door, and the bed touched both sides of the room, so the only way for me to go past her was to climb on top of them. So she gladly said yes and got up. But when she got to the door frame, she froze and stopped moving. That means froze. From the bedroom, you would be able to see all the way down to the kitchen. To the right of the room was the bathroom, and to the left was the living room. I got up and asked my mom if she was okay. And as I asked, a tall, dark figure with a fedora, coat, and a briefcase, a man in black, walked from the living room to the bathroom. I wasn't freaked out. I thought it was my mom's boyfriend at the time, but I remembered he wasn't there that night. Then, after the tall figure walked into the bathroom, my mom snapped out of it and proceeded to the kitchen. I was so confused and looked at the restroom and saw no lights on, and the door was wide open. I thought he was just messing around, but my mom got the water and gave it to me and asked why I was standing up. I answered, "Who was that man, Mom?" And she had a tired, confused look on her face and said that I needed to go to sleep and that I had school in the morning. To this day, my mom never knew what I was talking about, and just recently I saw on TikTok that a lot of people saw this guy and even talked to them, hugged them, or would do stuff with them to make them feel better. He wasn't scary, it was just odd. I'm 22 years old now and remember all of it as if it happened last night. I'm not sure if I would want to hug Hat Man.
This story is called Black Blob in My Bedroom. I'm hoping, like others that might come here, I am looking for help, for an answer and a solution. My problem started about 2 years ago. The first time I was cooking during the day and I felt a finger poke me in my behind. I turned, expecting my grandchild's face. Nothing there. Maybe a week later, my dog perked up in the floor where she was sleeping. I heard as well while reading from my cell phone. I know this will sound weird because my family and friends don't know how to react to my telling them. I would see what I would think of a visible human were crawling into the bed toward me. I could see it but couldn't believe it, and in a paralyzed state. Not moving, and I saw the bed go in as if hands and knees were on it. It's invisible, and again, with a finger or so, it felt like it was poking me in my behind. I jumped and screamed at this dark black being that looked like a man with no eyes. He seemed frightened at my fear and sprang up from the foot of the bed to a corner on the ceiling. Of course, scared, I moved to the office/third bedroom. Every night for the next 8 months, my border collie would start barking with her hair standing up. Most all nights, she would focus above my husband in his recliner. She did this every night for about 8 months, even if my husband wasn't at home. Then, this last Thanksgiving, my daughter was in my room visiting, and she noticed a frisbee-sized gray spot I had never noticed right above where my head lays down to sleep. Strange to me, this crack that's been there for almost 15 years. It doesn't seem to be a water stain. Anyway, I started noticing something lightly touching me from behind while I was reading before bed. My intuition told me that whatever was happening, this thing has feelings for me. I would now fast forward to present, and I was about to wake up. I think if it would wake me up somehow, and there in my darkness of my room, right above me, was a softball-sized thing. It was the blackest I've ever seen. At first I tried clearing my eyes, as if it wasn't real. It's there all right. I haven't figured out if the Shadow Man and this now 2 years later Black Robe are the same, because the Shadow Man also seemed to leave me with a feeling of naughtiness. I wasn't too scared, just really wondered why this was happening. It explains a lot about the sad and unlucky events in my life during the last 2 years. Every night for about 2 weeks, it kept bobbing above and then starting coming too close to my face. So for a week now, I have slept with the lights on. I don't think it has been necessary since I was a small child. Also wanted to mention, with negative circumstances in the last 2 years, it seems that things like violence, extreme behavior for me, my husband of 37 years, and our adult son who lives here, the dog is sadly traumatized from all this occurred. I meant to mention about 8 months before Thanksgiving 2019, my dog was quiet until also about a month ago, when the black blob appeared in my room. She doesn't seem to notice when it's attached to me, which I find odd. Does that mean there is more than one entity here? I've seen it in the daytime, and because my son and husband don't believe me, I feel like, pardon the expression, it turned up the heat. And now, even with the lights on, it's as if it wants me in the room, on the ceiling, possibly around the gray spot. I don't see it so far with leaving the lights on, but it's really touching me. I feel like it's being some kind of tentacles on the back of my neck. I realize how insane this sounds, but I'm so desperate for a solution, I'm throwing it all out in public. Somehow I'd love to find out if I'm imagining this whole thing, but I feel really heavy. Heavier than too much Christmas dinner in my lower stomach area. Right now I had to get out of my bed because I think it's trying to stop me from writing for help. I can feel something wrapping around both my legs, my hair, the strange feeling on my neck, and yes, it's inside me. I can absolutely feel it moving around, as if I'm pregnant. I'm not even in my bed, but I'm in my office chair. I tried sleeping with my husband. We're old, and as he watched TV, it appeared as the black blob got much larger above my head, and was light gray, and then back to darkest black. My husband looked and it disappeared, so he saw nothing. I try not to have fear because I feel like it feeds on negative energy. I will also add that, as a Christian with a very open mind, I feel like I brought it here. I don't drink, no drugs. I've tried sage, smudge, stick, praying in the name of Jesus. I've asked believing friends, and so far I'm physically uncomfortable. My family thinks I'm crazy and sleepy. I don't close my eyes comfortably until daylight. It's kind of hard to read, but hope you get some help. The story is called The Ghost Following Me. When I was 13, I went into a very well-known haunted house with a tour group. There was known child activity, so I had taken a light-up toy to interact with the spirits. It didn't take long before I was interacting with a child spirit. I told my mother before I left that I felt sorry for the child spirit, and I wished I could take them out of that house, because I didn't like them being stuck there. I went on with my life. Things would happen that I couldn't explain, but nothing big. When I turned 19, I got my first real job at a care facility. The first 2 years I worked there, nothing extraordinary happened. Then one night, as I was goofing off with a coworker, I started to randomly sing I'm a Little Teapot, but I didn't finish the full song. A little girl's voice finished it, loud and clear, and both my coworker and I heard it. Soon after that, the little girl became very active. We would hear her playing in the hallway, and a couple of times we would see her. And it wasn't just me and the other coworker I had been working with that night. It had been at least 4 other staff who had seen her. I ended up going to another job at a nursing home, not thinking much about the little girl. There was one resident who would always talk to someone that I couldn't see when I was in her room. One staff member mentioned that she didn't do that unless I was there. One day, the resident told me that it was so nice of me to bring my little sister to work with me. So I got curious, and I started to ask questions. She described the little girl as the same ghost child that I had seen at my previous job. So later that night, I called my old co-workers to ask about the activity, and they said it had been quiet. That night, I woke up my dog, who had no aggressive behavior in her bones, standing over me protectively as she stared at my open bedroom door. There stood the little girl, clear as day. Before, I would only get glimpses, but this time it was a full-body apparition, as if she was an actual person standing in my doorway. She smiled at me and then giggled and ran away. I quickly got out of my bed to see where she had gone, but there was no sign of her. And I know I couldn't have seen some random child who had found its way into my apartment. There was no one else in my house, and no way to escape without me noticing. The apartment was small, but large enough that if a child had run for the door, I would have seen them leave. For the next 3 years, the same resident would have conversations with my sister, and a few other residents also mentioned my sister. I never engaged with the spirit, just let her be. Every once in a while, she would let me know she was there, playing with the lights. Her favorite thing is playing with water. But anyway, I just went on with life, even though I knew she was there. But when I left the nursing home, I did make a request. I asked her to stay with the woman who had originally seen her. The woman had no family left, and was always so lonely, but always seemed so excited to see my sister. I didn't know if it worked. I never asked my old co-workers if she had stayed or not, but I didn't notice anything happening that the little girl would do. When I was 25, I ended up in a bad relationship. I ended up getting pregnant and coming home to live with my parents. Now my parents have 2 homes, and both could be considered haunted. My dad is very sensitive and always makes a deal with spirits in the home, that they won't get rid of them as long as they don't harm us. So the house I grew up in had an old farmer who had only showed himself a couple of times. The other house that my parents remodeled has a woman who once babysat my dad. She is very active, but isn't bad. Where I'm going with this is that I live in my childhood home. The activity was slim to none till after I had my son. I would notice the things that the little girl used to do started happening again. My son, still a small baby, would watch something move around him. As he got older, the activity died down, so I thought little of it, thinking maybe it was a family member coming to say hi. When my son was 2, I got a job at a daycare. This daycare had once been a funeral home, had activity from the start, to the point that a boss had the place smudged. It didn't get rid of all the activity though. In the baby room that I worked in, there was a toy that would sing when touch activated. I don't know why, but it was a favorite toy of mine, and I would use it to play with the babies almost every day, till it started to sing on its own. The song was getting a bit annoying because it would go off multiple times a day. So we opened the back to check the batteries to find that it had never had batteries at all. My coworker quickly put the toy away, and we didn't talk about it again. But other coworkers would talk about all the activities they experienced. But one thing always stuck out to me. The water would randomly turn on in the room my son was in, and that toy only worked when I had been around. I left the daycare for a short time to help a friend with her restaurant, but my son stayed in the same daycare. One day his teacher informed me that he and another little boy had become close, but they wouldn't play with other children. But they always mentioned the same name. So she asked me if there was some kind of show that had a lead character named Inna. I had never heard of it, and soon it was forgotten. That was until I went back about a year later. I wasn't in the baby room anymore, but worked as a preschool teacher assistant. That's when I noticed my son was still playing by himself. When I asked him, he said he wasn't alone. Inna played with him. I figured he had an imaginary friend. The name seemed familiar, but I couldn't quite place why. A year later, my son was in my preschool class. I had moved from an assistant to the lead teacher, and was having issues with another coworker that worked in a room downstairs. She had left for the night, but I would hear someone down in her room. So I went to check to make sure a child hadn't been left behind. The co-worker was very organized and OCD, but when I walked downstairs, her room was a disaster, as if a child had a tantrum and had thrown things around in the room. And that is when I saw her, the same little girl that I had seen so many times. She looked up at me and said, "That teacher is mean to you." And then she was gone, as if she hadn't been standing right in front of me. I quickly got the room picked up and asked her not to destroy the room again. Out of curiosity, I contacted an old co-worker at the nursing home and asked her how that one resident was doing. I was then informed that she had passed away a few months after my son was born. But she would still talk to someone up until her last day. After that, if I ever had a disagreement with a staff member, the activity around them became scarier. Our new staff would come to me with white faces explaining some unexplained occurrence happened to them. I got a new assistant after the last one refused to come back and never explained why. That is when I witnessed what was going on to the new staff. One assistant went into the craft closet and supplies flew out at her. Nothing dangerous, but scary nonetheless. Later that day, the kids were gone, and I sat down with the staff member and talked to the little girl. I introduced her to my assistant and asked her to play nice. The toy with no battery started to sing right after that, but the assistant never had an issue after that. I also started to notice that when I drove past my job there and looked up at the big windows, the little girl would be seen standing there and wave at me. I was curious to see if it was just me who would see this, so I took a few friends by my job. As I did, they all seemed too pale, and I asked them what they saw individually and away from each other when we got home. They all described the same little girl. One friend was very into the paranormal and started to ask me questions, so I told her about all the experiences I had encountered and how this little girl seemed to keep showing up at my jobs. It's then that I mentioned my son's imaginary friend, Inna. This piqued my friend's interest, so she brought up some information on a local haunted house and showed me a photo of a girl. I couldn't believe it. It was the same little girl that I had been seeing. She then showed me the information below the photo. Her name had been Inna, and she had been murdered in that local haunted house that I had visited. I was a bit shocked, but it was more of the fact that this child had been following me since I was 13 years old. I'm now 30 years old, and I had asked Inna to watch over the daycare and the children when I had left a year ago. My boss said there was a few incidents, but nothing bad. Just tonight, before I started to write this, I saw Inna again, but something feels different. It felt like she was hiding from me. I have always seen her straight on or out of the corner of my eye, but tonight I saw her through a mirror. It was unnerving. I feel like she is angry with me, and I am unsure what to do about it. Well, we are woefully out of time this week on the show. Thanks as always, Jimmy Haunted. Thanks for listening. We'll see you again right here next week. God bless you.